What the hell is this? Since when do they let people like you sit up here?
The white man's lip curled in disgust. He looked the black passenger up and down like something stuck to his shoe.
This is first class, buddy, not the back of a bus.
He turned to the flight attendant, voice dripping with contempt.
I'm Platinum Elite, 20 years. And you're telling me I sit in coach while this guy gets the good seat? Are you out of your mind?
The black man closed his laptop slowly, looked up. His voice was low, steady, almost gentle.
I have a ticket for this seat, sir. A ticket? Right. And I'm the president.
He snapped his fingers at the attendant.
Sweetheart, call security. Something doesn't add up here.
They removed the black man 15 minutes later, gave his first-class seat to the man without one. One phone call changed everything. What did they not know? But let me take you back, before the insults, before security, before all of it. Saturday afternoon, Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, the busiest airport in America. Gates packed, loudspeakers echoing overhead, the smell of burnt coffee and fast food hanging in the recycled air. Thousands of people dragging luggage, checking phones, running late. And somewhere in Terminal B, a man named Owen Mitchell stood in line at a coffee kiosk. No bodyguard, no assistant, no entourage. Just a man in a simple navy suit, pulling his own carry-on, waiting his turn like everybody else. He ordered a black coffee, thanked the barista by name, read it off her tag. She smiled. He smiled back. Nothing about Owen screamed wealth. No flashy watch, no designer logos, no first-class attitude. He moved through that airport the way he moved through life. Quiet, unhurried, unbothered. But here's what nobody in that terminal knew. Owen Mitchell was the founder and CEO of Pinnacle Aviation Holdings, one of the most powerful private equity firms in American commercial aviation. His company held controlling stakes in regional airlines, airport service providers, and fuel logistics networks across 14 states. When Owen walked into a boardroom, people stopped talking. When he made a phone call, entire companies changed direction. Forbes had him on their list, twice. But Owen didn't care about any of that. Not today. Today, he was just a man catching a flight to Washington, D.C. for a Monday meeting with the FAA. He had his laptop, his coffee, and his boarding pass. Seat 3A, first class, paid in full. He boarded early with the first-class group, stowed his carry-on in the overhead bin, settled into his window seat, opened his laptop and started reviewing an earnings report. The leather seat creaked softly beneath him. Late afternoon sunlight slanted through the oval window, warm on his sleeve. Owen took a slow sip of coffee and exhaled. For about 12 minutes, everything was peaceful. Now let me tell you about the other man. Gerald Braxton pulled up to the departures curb in a black Mercedes SUV. Late. Already irritated. He tossed his keys to the curbside valet without a word. Didn't tip, didn't make eye contact. Gerald was 58, real estate developer. Old money from Buckhead, the wealthiest neighborhood in Atlanta. The kind of man who talked loud on his phone in public so strangers could hear about his deals. And that's exactly what he did in the boarding area, pacing back and forth, barking into his phone about a property closing Monday, making sure every single person around him knew he was important. Gerald was Sky Nation Platinum Elite, 20 years of loyalty. He expected the airline to treat him like royalty. And usually, they did. But today, Gerald had a problem. He'd booked late. The only seat left was in the coach. Row 34, middle seat, between a teenager with a neck pillow and a woman with a crying baby. Gerald Braxton did not sit in the middle seats. Gerald Braxton did not sit in the coach. And Gerald Braxton was not about to start today. He marched to the gate counter, demanded an upgrade. The gate agent, a young woman barely out of training, told him the first class was full, every seat taken. Gerald leaned across the counter. His voice dropped to that particular tone powerful men use when they want someone to feel small. You don't understand. I am Platinum Elite. Find me a seat up front. I don't care how. The gate agent swallowed hard, typed something into her screen, shook her head again. Gerald boarded the plane with a coach ticket and a face full of thunder. He stepped into the first-class cabin, looked left, looked right, took in the scene. Leather seats, champagne flutes, warm towels, passengers already settled in. And then his eyes locked onto seat 3A. Owen Mitchell, the only black passenger in the entire first-class cabin. Reading quietly, coffee in the armrest holder, laptop open. Gerald stared, his jaw tightened. Something ugly crossed his face, the kind of expression that doesn't need words. He turned to the nearest flight attendant, a senior crew member named Diane Caldwell. 15 years with Sky Nation. The kind of attendant who knew which passengers to smile at and which ones to overlook. Gerald leaned in close. His cologne, sharp and expansive, filled the narrow aisle. I need that seat. He didn't point. He didn't have to. They both knew exactly which seat he meant, and they both knew exactly why. Diane Caldwell glanced around the first-class cabin. 8 passengers, 7 white, 1 black. She didn't think of it that way, of course. She would never say it out loud. But something in her brain made the calculation anyway, fast, automatic, invisible. The kind of math that happens beneath the surface, where bias lives and breathes and makes decisions before the conscious mind even wakes up. Gerald wanted a seat. The first class was full. Someone had to move. Not the white businessman in 1A. He looked like a senator. Not the older couple in 2C and 2D. They had matching Hermes bags and the quiet authority of generational wealth. Not the blonde woman in 4A. She could be someone's wife, someone important, someone who would complain to the right people. That left Owen, the quiet one, the one in the simple navy suit with no logos, no gold watch, no visible proof of belonging. The one who, in Diane's mind, seemed most likely to accept a voucher and walk away without making a scene. She was wrong about that. Diane smoothed her uniform, lifted her chin, and walked over to seat 3A. She put on her best professional smile, the one she practiced in the mirror before every shift. Warm but firm, helpful but final. The smile that said, "This is not a negotiation." "Excuse me, sir. I'm sorry for the inconvenience, but there's been a system error with your reservation. We're going to need to reseat you in the main cabin." She held out a small envelope. Inside, a $50 travel voucher. The paper was thin and flimsy between her fingers. Owen didn't reach for it. He didn't even glance at it. "A system error," he said quietly. Not a question, a repetition. Like he was tasting the lie to see how it felt in his mouth. "Yes, sir. A duplicate booking in the system. It happens occasionally." "I see." Owen tilted his laptop screen down slowly. The screen light faded from his face. "Is anyone else in first class affected by this system error?" Diane blinked. "No, sir. Just your seat." "Just my seat." Owen nodded slowly. Out of 8 seats in this cabin, the system only made an error with mine. The only seat occupied by a black passenger. The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. Diane's smile flickered, just for a second, like a light bulb about to die. Sir, This has nothing to do with... I paid for this seat, Owen said. His voice never rose, not even a fraction. I have my boarding pass. I have my confirmation email. There is no error. He looked at her steadily, patient, calm. The way a man looks when he's been through this before and already knows exactly how it ends. I'm not moving. Diane stood there, envelope still extended, smile still frozen. For a moment, she looked like a mannequin somebody had placed in the aisle and forgotten about. Behind her, Gerald had been listening to every word. His face was getting redder by the second. The vein on the side of his neck pulsed visibly beneath his tan skin. His fingers drummed against the seat back in front of him, a rapid, impatient rhythm. He stepped forward, didn't wait for an invitation, didn't lower his voice. Hey, buddy. Owen looked past Diane at Gerald. She asked you nicely, Gerald said, loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. Every syllable is as sharp as broken glass. Take the voucher, grab your little bag, and go sit where you're supposed to sit. The words hung in the air like cigarette smoke. Toxic, thick, impossible to ignore. Owen said nothing, just looked at him, steady, unblinking. What? Gerald spread his hands wide, palms up, playing to the audience. You don't understand English? I'm Platinum Elite. I've been flying this airline since before you could afford a bus ticket. This seat is mine now. Silence. The kind that presses against your eardrums. The kind that makes the hum of the engine sound deafening. A woman in row 2 looked down at her magazine. The businessman in 1A suddenly became very interested in his phone. The older couple in row 2 stared out the window like the tarmac was the most fascinating thing they'd ever seen. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Owen turned back to Diane. His voice remained impossibly calm, like a lake with no wind. Ma'am, I'd like to speak to your supervisor. Gerald let out a sharp, ugly laugh that bounced off the low cabin ceiling. Supervisor? What are you going to do, file a complaint? He shook his head in theatrical disbelief. You people always want to make everything into a thing. Just take the voucher and go. You people. 2 words, small words, the kind of words that carry centuries of weight. Diane practically ran to the intercom. Her heels clicked rapid fire against the cabin floor. 3 minutes later, Craig Lawson stepped onto the plane. Gate supervisor, early 30s, clipboard in hand, short-sleeved dress shirt, a name tag that was slightly crooked. The kind of guy who got promoted for following rules, not for questioning them. Craig had already heard Diane's version of events on the jet bridge. In her version, Owen was uncooperative and creating a disturbance. She didn't mention Gerald's demands. She didn't mention his comments. She didn't mention that Gerald had no first-class ticket. She didn't mention you people. Craig walked up to row 3 with the confidence of a man who had already made up his mind before his feet touched the cabin carpet. Sir, I understand there's a seating issue. I'm going to need you to step off the aircraft so we can sort this out at the gate. Owen closed his laptop, placed both hands flat on the armrests. His wedding ring caught the overhead light. Am I being removed from this flight? No. Craig shook his head quickly, clipboard pressed against his chest like a shield. Nothing like that. We just need to resolve the situation away from other passengers. What situation? Owen's voice was level, measured. I'm sitting in my assigned seat. I have a valid ticket. I haven't raised my voice. I haven't threatened anyone. I haven't touched anyone. He paused, let each word settle. What exactly is the situation? Craig shifted his weight from one foot to the other. His clipboard creaked in his grip. A bead of sweat slid down his temple despite the air conditioning blasting cold above them. Sir, I'm asking you to cooperate. I am cooperating. I'm sitting quietly in the seat I paid for. That is cooperation. Gerald couldn't take it anymore. He shoved past Diane in the aisle, stepped right up to Owen's row, and leaned down. Close. Too close. Owen could smell the bourbon on his breath from the airport lounge. Could see the tiny broken capillaries on Gerald's nose. Could feel the heat radiating off his flush skin. "Listen to me carefully," Gerald said, his voice low and venomous. Each word was slow and deliberate, like he was speaking to a child. "I don't know who you think you are, but I know who you're not. You're not first class. You're not one of us, and you never will be." He jabbed a thick finger toward Owen's face. "If you don't get up right now, I will personally make sure you never set foot on this airline again." Owen looked up at Gerald. Their eyes locked. 3 seconds. 5. 10. The cabin held its breath. Then Owen spoke, softly, almost gently, like a man who had nothing left to prove. "Are you finished?" Gerald's face twisted into something ugly. He straightened up, turned to Craig, and jabbed that same finger toward the gate. "Get him off. Now, or I'm calling your CEO myself." Craig made his decision. The wrong one. The one that would cost him everything. "Sir," he said to Owen, avoiding his eyes, "I'm going to have to insist. Please collect your belongings and exit the aircraft." Owen held Craig's gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded. Once. Slowly. He closed his laptop, slid it into his leather bag, zipped the bag shut with a soft metallic sound, stood up, unhurried, deliberate, dignified. He straightened his jacket, adjusted his cuffs, picked up his coffee cup from the armrest and placed it gently on Diane's tray, without a word, without anger, without pleading. Then he walked up the aisle toward the door. Every eye in first class followed him. The cabin was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming through the vents, the leather seats creaking as passengers shifted uncomfortably. A child crying somewhere far away in the coach. Loretta, a black woman sitting in row 5 with her husband Dennis, pressed her hand over her mouth. Her eyes glistened under the reading light. Dennis stared straight ahead, jaw locked so tight the muscles in his neck stood out like steel cables. As Owen passed Gerald, the older man didn't step aside, didn't move an inch. Owen had to turn sideways to squeeze past him in the narrow aisle. Their shoulders brushed. Gerald didn't flinch. Gerald smiled. The kind of smile that isn't a smile at all. The kind that says, "I win, you lose. That's how this works." Owen walked through the first-class curtain without looking back. The heavy fabric swung shut behind him, like a door closing on a conversation that never happened. Behind him, Gerald dropped into seat 3A, Owen's seat. He ran his hands over the leather armrests like a man admiring new property, stretched his legs, adjusted the headrest, exhaled loudly. The long, satisfied sigh of a man who always gets what he wants. "Sweetheart," he called to Diane, snapping his fingers twice. "Whiskey, neat. And close that curtain. I can smell the coach from here." 2 rows back, Haley Preston, a 22-year-old college student with sharp eyes and a phone angled just right behind the seat in front of her, hit the save button on a video that would eventually be seen by 80 million people. But that part comes later. The jet bridge smelled like diesel fuel and stale carpet. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. Owen stood there alone, bag over his shoulder, boarding pass still in his hand. A boarding pass for a seat that someone else was now sitting in. Craig Lawson appeared a minute later. He wouldn't look Owen in the eye. Instead, He stared at his clipboard like it held the answers to everything wrong with the world. "So here's what we can do," Craig said, clicking his pen. "I can rebook you on the next available flight. Departs in about 5 hours. Coach seat. And we'll throw in a $200 voucher for the inconvenience." Owen let that sit for a moment. 5 hours, coach, $200. That was the price tag they'd put on his dignity. "I'd like a written explanation," Owen said. "Specifically, I want documentation stating why I was removed from my assigned seat." Craig's pen stopped clicking. We don't really do written reports for seating changes, sir." This wasn't a seating change. I was removed from the aircraft. That requires documentation under federal aviation regulations. Craig swallowed. His Adam's apple bobbed like a fishing float. I'll have to check on that. I'd also like your full name and employee ID number." "It's Craig Lawson." He said it fast, like ripping off a bandage. "And the flight attendant who asked me to move? I can't share crew information, sir. That's company policy." Company policy. Owen repeated those words the same way he'd repeated system error earlier, tasting the lie, letting it dissolve on his tongue. "I'd like to speak to your station manager." Craig nodded too quickly, almost relieved to pass the problem up the chain. He pulled out his radio, mumbled something into it, and disappeared back through the door. Owen waited. He set his bag down on the cold concrete floor of the jet bridge, leaned against the ribbed metal wall, crossed his arms. He could hear the engines warming up on the other side of the fuselage. His flight, his seat, moving on without him. Through the small rectangular window in the jet bridge wall, he could see baggage handlers tossing luggage onto a cart below. They were laughing about something. The sun was still out. The world was still turning. Everything is normal. Everything is fine. Except it wasn't. 8 minutes later, Brenda Holloway arrived. Station manager, mid-50s, blonde hair pulled tight in a bun so severe it looked painful. A pressed navy blazer with a gold Sky Nation pin on the lapel. She walked the way people walk when they've already decided the conversation is a formality. Brisk steps, fixed smile, zero curiosity about what actually happened. She'd heard Craig's version. She'd heard Diane's version. 2 versions of the same lie, stacked on top of each other like bricks in a wall. In their story, Owen was the problem. Owen was difficult. Owen was aggressive. Owen wouldn't cooperate. Nobody mentioned Gerald. Nobody mentioned you people. Nobody mentioned the white man with no first-class ticket sitting in a stolen seat drinking stolen whiskey. "Mr. Mitchell," Brenda began, extending her hand with practiced warmth. Owen looked at her hand, didn't take it. She withdrew it smoothly, without missing a beat, like she'd rehearsed that exact movement in a customer service training seminar. "I understand you've had a frustrating experience today, and I sincerely apologize for the inconvenience." She placed a new boarding pass on top of Owen's bag. "Next flight, coach, seat 34B. I've upgraded your voucher to $300, and I've personally ensured you'll have a window seat on the next departure." She tilted her head with a sympathetic expression that didn't reach her eyes. "We value every single passenger, Mr. Mitchell, and I want to make sure you know that." Was I removed because another passenger didn't want to sit next to a black man? The question cut through Brenda's rehearsed speech like a blade through silk. Her smile didn't disappear. It froze, locked in place like a porcelain mask. Her fingers curled slightly at her sides. "Sir?" She lowered her voice. Professional, controlled, every syllable measured. "Sky Nation Airways does not discriminate on the basis of race, color, or national origin. I can assure you this was purely an operational decision." "Then put me back on that plane." "Unfortunately, the aircraft door has been sealed. The flight is preparing for pushback. It's simply not possible at this point to..." The flight hasn't been pushed back yet. Owen's voice was quiet, but it cut through hers like a scalpel. I can hear the APU running through that wall. The door can be reopened. You have that authority. Brenda's left eye twitched, almost imperceptible, a tiny crack in the porcelain. Mr. Mitchell, I understand your frustration, but the captain has made the final decision regarding passenger configuration. My hands are tied. Your hands are tied. Owen nodded slowly. Let each word land separately. A passenger with no first-class ticket boards is late, demands my seat, calls me "you people," threatens me in front of an entire cabin full of witnesses, and your hands are tied. Brenda said nothing. Her smile was gone now. What replaced it was something worse, blank indifference, the flat, empty expression of a bureaucrat who had already filed this conversation under "resolved" in her head, and was simply waiting for Owen to stop talking. Let me be straightforward with you, sir. Her tone shifted, the velvet glove coming off, revealing something cold and hard underneath. You have two options. Accept the rebooking and the voucher, or file a formal complaint through our customer service portal online. Either way, this matter is closed. She straightened her blazer, adjusted her Sky Nation pin with 2 fingers. One more thing. She paused, didn't turn around. I'd strongly recommend not escalating this any further. In my experience, these situations rarely end favorably for the passenger who chooses to make them complicated. A threat, wrapped in corporate language, delivered with a smile that was no longer there. And she walked away, heels clicking on concrete, each click echoing down the empty jet bridge like a countdown nobody was paying attention to. Meanwhile, 30 feet away, on the other side of the aircraft wall, Gerald Braxton was living his best life. He was stretched across seats 3A and 3B, shoes kicked off, stockinged feet resting on the footrest, whiskey glass sweating in his hand. The leather armrest was still warm from where Owen had been sitting 20 minutes ago. Gerald turned to the passenger across the aisle, a white man in his 40s, wearing a banking conference lanyard, and spoke loud enough for anyone within 3 rows to hear. You've got to be firm with these people. Give them an inch, they take a mile. That's just how it is. That's how it's always been. The man across the aisle gave a tight, uncomfortable smile, looked down at his phone, said nothing. Gerald didn't notice, or didn't care. He swirled his whiskey, took a long, satisfied sip, and kept talking. 20 years I've been Platinum Elite. 20 years, and they almost let some random guy who probably used a buddy pass or whatever scam they're running these days take a first-class seat from me. He chuckled low in his throat. Not today. Not on my watch. He flagged down Diane, who appeared instantly, obediently, like a dog responding to a whistle. Another whiskey, sweetheart, and some of those warm nuts, the good ones. 2 rows behind Gerald, half hidden behind the seat in front of her, Haley Preston's phone was still recording. The red dot blinked silently in the corner of her screen. She had captured everything since the beginning. Diane's lie, Gerald's insults, the removal, and now this. Gerald sprawled in someone else's seat, bragging about it. Her hands were trembling, but her camera was perfectly, devastatingly steady. Back on the jet bridge, Owen Mitchell stood alone in the silence. The fluorescent light above him flickered once, twice, then held steady. He looked down at the boarding pass Brenda had left on his bag. Seat 34B, coach, middle seat, 5 hours from now. $300 in funny money that couldn't buy back a single second of what just happened. Owen picked up the boarding pass, studied it for a moment. The thin paper trembled slightly, not from his hands, but from the vibration of the engines on the other side of the wall. Then he set it down on the jet bridge railing, neatly, Precisely. The way a man sets down something he will never need again. Owen reached up and straightened his tie. Slow, deliberate, the way he did every morning before walking into a boardroom. Then he pulled out his phone, scrolled through his contacts, past dozens of names, senators, CEOs, board chairs, media executives. He stopped on one, Raymond Ellis, Chief Legal Officer, Pinnacle Aviation Holdings. He pressed the call, held the phone to his ear. One ring, two. "Raymond, it's Owen." His voice was steady, not angry, not shaking, not pleading. The same voice he used when billion-dollar acquisitions hung in the balance. The voice that made grown men in expensive suits sit up straight. "Pull up our portfolio. What's our current equity position in Sky Nation Airways?" He listened, nodded once. 34%. Controlling stake. Owen Mitchell was the single largest shareholder of the airline that had just thrown him off a plane to make room for a man who called him "you people." "Call an emergency board meeting. I want every member on the line within 1 hour." He paused, turned his head, looked through the jet bridge window at the Sky Nation logo painted on the tail of the aircraft. That blue and silver eagle, wings spread wide, the words "Fly with Pride" in silver lettering underneath. His airline, his logo, his pride. "And Raymond, ground the fleet." The silence on the other end lasted 3 full seconds. "Sir, the entire fleet?" "Every plane, 312 aircraft, nationwide, effective immediately. Not a single wheel turns until I say otherwise. Cite a comprehensive safety and compliance audit under federal regulation. Legal will confirm the authority." Owen's jaw tightened. Just once. The only visible sign that any of this had touched him at all. "One more thing. I want the full personnel file of every employee involved in what happened on this jet bridge today. Every name, every report, every radio transmission. On my desk before sunrise." He hung up, slid the phone into his breast pocket. Then Owen Mitchell picked up his bag, straightened his jacket one final time, and walked off the jet bridge into the terminal. Slow, steady, unhurried. The fluorescent light above where he'd been standing flickered one last time and went dark. It took 43 minutes. 43 minutes from the moment Owen hung up the phone to the moment every Sky Nation Airways aircraft in the United States received the same message from Operations Control in Dallas. All flights grounded, effective immediately, no exceptions. The order hit like an earthquake. At JFK, a 737 that had just pushed back was told to return. At O'Hare, 6 flights were canceled mid-boarding. At LAX, a line of Sky Nation planes sat frozen on the taxiway like toys someone had stopped playing with. 312 aircraft, all at once. News alerts hit phones across the country. Cable news broke in with a banner. Major U.S. airline grounds entire fleet. Cause unknown. Social media erupted. Passengers stranded at gates from coast to coast flooded Twitter with photos of departure boards glowing red with cancellations. Nobody knew why. But Owen Mitchell knew. At Hartsfield-Jackson, every Sky Nation gate went dark. Departure screens flipped to "canceled," one after another, like falling dominoes. And on the tarmac, Gerald Braxton's plane, the plane he'd stolen a seat on, lurched to a stop. The captain's voice crackled overhead, tense, uncertain. "Ladies and gentlemen, all Sky Nation flights system-wide have been placed on an immediate ground stop. We are returning to the gate. We apologize for the inconvenience. Gerald sat up straight. Whiskey sloshed over the rim of his glass onto his khaki pants. What the hell? We're going back? No one answered him. The flight attendants were huddled near the galley, whispering. Diane Caldwell's face had gone the color of old paper. In Dallas, Sky Nation CEO Philip Tanner was standing on the 9th green of his country club when his phone rang. He saw the caller ID, Pinnacle Aviation Holdings, and his golf club slipped from his fingers. He answered before the second ring. Mr. Mitchell, what's happening? Operations is saying the entire fleet... Philip. Owen's voice was calm. The kind of calm that terrifies people who understand what it means. I'm going to tell you exactly what happened today on one of your aircraft, and you're going to listen. Owen told him everything. The fabricated system error. Diane choosing the only black passenger to remove. Gerald's insults. Craig's complicity. Brenda's threats. The escort off the plane. The stolen seat. The whiskey. Every word is precise. No emotion. Just facts laid out like evidence on a courtroom table. 6 seconds of silence. Mr. Mitchell, I am so deeply... I don't want your apology, Philip. Owen's voice didn't waver. I want the gate security footage, every internal communication from today, and the personnel files of every employee involved, on my desk by 6 a.m. And I want a full, independent review of every discrimination complaint filed against Sky Nation in the past 5 years. Of course, absolutely, whatever. The fleet stays grounded until I'm satisfied. He hung up. Back at Hartsfield-Jackson, Brenda Holloway was at her desk when her phone rang. The regional vice president. She answered with her usual composure. 90 seconds later, she had no composure left. She ran through the terminal, past shuttered gates, past stranded passengers, and found Owen sitting in a plastic chair near gate B14. Legs crossed, phone in hand, calm as still water. Mr. Mitchell, she was out of breath. Her Sky Nation pin was crooked. I didn't realize. I had no idea you were... Owen looked up. His expression was neutral, almost kind, which made it worse. Didn't realize I was what, Brenda? That I was someone who mattered? He let the question settle into the air between them. That's exactly the problem. Brenda opened her mouth, closed it. Nothing came out. Craig Lawson appeared behind her. His clipboard was gone. His hands were empty and shaking. He looked like a man watching his entire career disappear in real time. On the tarmac, Gerald's plane had docked back at the gate. The captain announced all passengers would need to deplane. Gerald erupted. This is unacceptable. I have a meeting on Monday morning. Do you know who I am? Nobody answered. A male flight attendant, young, polite, just doing his job, asked Gerald to please take his belongings and move toward the exit. Gerald shoved him, both hands, hard. The young man stumbled backward into the galley cart. Coffee cups crashed to the floor. Hot liquid splashed across the carpet. Don't you touch me, Gerald screamed, even though he was the one doing the touching. I'll have every single one of you fired. 2 airport police officers were already at the gate. They boarded. They saw. They acted. Gerald Braxton was handcuffed in the first-class cabin, standing right next to seat 3A, the seat that had started all of this. The officers led him up the aisle, through the same first-class curtain Owen had walked through an hour earlier. But Gerald wasn't walking with dignity. He was red-faced, spit-flying, screaming threats that echoed through an empty cabin where nobody was listening anymore. Haley Preston captured every frame, every word, every second. She uploaded the first clip before Gerald's feet touched the jet bridge. The caption? They kicked a black man out of first class to give his seat to this guy. You won't believe what happened next. Within 2 hours, 4 million views. By midnight, 40 million. By the end of the week, 80. But the real consequences were just getting started. The fallout was fast, and it was brutal. Within 6 hours, Sky Nation's Internal Affairs Division had launched a full investigation. Security footage from Gate B14 and the aircraft cabin had been pulled, reviewed, and timestamped. Every second accounted for. And the footage told a very different story than Diane Caldwell's version. Diane was called in first. She sat across from 2 investigators in a windowless room at Sky Nation's Atlanta Operations Center. Fluorescent lights humming, a recorder blinking red on the table. She tried the same story. Owen was disruptive. Owen was uncooperative. Owen escalated the situation. Then they played the footage. There was Owen, sitting quietly, laptop open, voice steady, never raising his hands, never raising his voice. And there was Diane, walking past 7 white passengers to ask the only black man in first class to give up his seat for someone without a first-class ticket. Diane's composure cracked. "He pressured me," she whispered. "Gerald was so insistent. I didn't want a confrontation. I just picked the passenger I thought would be easiest to move." The investigator looked at her over his glasses. "And why did you think Mr. Mitchell would be the easiest?" She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Diane Caldwell was suspended without pay, effective immediately. Craig Lawson was next. His incident report was compared against the security footage. In Craig's version, Owen was agitated and verbally combative. No mention of Gerald's racial comments. No mention of "you people." No mention of Gerald lacking a first-class ticket. The report wasn't incomplete. It was falsified. Craig Lawson was suspended without pay. His file flagged for termination review. Brenda Holloway was placed on administrative leave that same evening. Her handling, threatening Owen with federal prosecution instead of investigating the actual complaint, was documented as gross management failure. Her recorded words, played back in the investigation room, sounded even worse than they had on the jet bridge.
Cold, dismissive, dripping with the cruelty of someone who believed she held all the power.
She held none of it now. Then there was Gerald. Gerald Braxton spent Saturday night in a federal holding cell at Atlanta's airport detention facility. The charge? Assault on a flight crew member under 49. USC Section 46,504. A federal offense carrying up to 20 years. A second charge followed, interference with a flight crew. His attorney arrived Sunday morning, requesting bail. The federal magistrate reviewed the footage. Gerald shoving the flight attendant, coffee cups crashing, the screaming, the threats. Bail was set at $250,000. Gerald paid it. But the damage was already spreading far beyond that courtroom. By Monday morning, Braxton Development Group was hemorrhaging. His 2 largest commercial tenants announced they were reviewing their lease agreements in light of recent events. A luxury condo development in Midtown Atlanta lost its lead investor overnight. The investor's spokesperson offered one line: "We don't do business with people who behave like that." Gerald's publicist quit by text message before lunch. While Gerald's world crumbled, Owen Mitchell released a statement. Brief, measured, no rage, no theatrics. It went out through Pinnacle Aviation Holdings. Owen said no passenger should ever be removed from a flight because of the color of their skin. He said what happened to him happens to black travelers every single day. The only difference was that he had the power to stop it. Most people don't, and that is what needs to change. The statement landed alongside Haley's video. Together, they burned through every platform like a match dropped in dry grass. 14 hours after Owen's call, the fleet was cleared to fly again. But not without conditions. Owen required 3 things before a single engine restarted. First, a full independent review of every discrimination complaint filed against Sky Nation in the past 5 years. Second, mandatory bias training for every employee, from gate agents to executives. Third, body-worn cameras at every boarding gate across the airline's network. The board agreed, unanimously. They didn't have a choice. The wheels started turning again, but Sky Nation would never be the same airline it was 24 hours ago. And neither would Gerald Braxton. The video didn't just go viral. It became a national reckoning. Within 72 hours of Haley Preston's upload, every major news network in America had run the story. CNN, MS, NBC, Fox, ABC. The footage played on loop. Gerald's sneer, Diane's lie, Owen's quiet dignity as he walked off the plane. Commentators dissected every second. Hashtags exploded. Hashtag Justice for Owen trended for 9 straight days. But the internet's attention span is short. The federal government is not. The Department of Transportation opened a formal investigation into Sky Nation Airways within 1 week of the incident. What they found went far beyond a single flight in Atlanta. Hundreds of complaints. Exposed by Owen's story, passengers from across the country came forward. Black and brown travelers who had been moved, downgraded, questioned, searched, or removed from Sky Nation flights over the past decade. Each story is different in its details. Each story is identical in its pattern. A quiet assumption, a fabricated reason, a seat that suddenly needed to be reassigned. One complaint came from a cardiac surgeon flying home from a medical conference, moved from first class so a white passenger could have a more comfortable arrangement. Another from an Army lieutenant colonel in full dress uniform, questioned at the gate about whether her first-class ticket was legitimate. Another from a 68-year-old grandmother, asked to prove she hadn't accidentally wandered into the wrong cabin while her 3 grandchildren watched. The pattern was undeniable. The DOT referred the matter to the Senate Commerce Committee. And that's how Owen Mitchell ended up sitting behind a microphone in a wood-paneled hearing room in Washington, D.C., 3 weeks after being dragged off his own airline's plane. The room was packed. Cameras lined the back wall. Senators sat in a raised semicircle, notepads open, faces serious. Owen wore the same kind of suit he always wore. Simple, dark, no flash. He didn't bring notes. He didn't need them. He spoke for 14 minutes. Calm, precise, devastating. He described the incident without emotion, the fabricated system error, the demand to move, Gerald's words, the search, the escort, the applause when he left. He laid each fact down like a brick, building a wall of evidence that no one in that room could look away from. Then he read from the letters. The surgeon, the lieutenant colonel, the grandmother, voice after voice after voice. People who had no billion-dollar portfolio, no controlling stake, no phone call that could ground a fleet. People who had only their dignity, and watched it get taken away at 30,000 feet. Owen paused, looked up from the letters, looked directly into the camera. I grounded 312 aircraft to make a point, but I shouldn't have to own the airline to be treated with basic human dignity. No one should. The room was silent. One senator removed her glasses and pressed her fingers to the bridge of her nose. Another stared down at his desk, jaw tight. That clip alone was viewed 60 million times in 48 hours. 5 weeks later, Gerald Braxton's federal trial began. The courtroom was standing room only, media in every row, sketch artists working furiously. Gerald sat at the defense table in a suit that cost more than most people's rent. But for the first time in his life, money couldn't buy him out of the chair he was sitting in. The prosecution's case was methodical and merciless. Haley's video, gate security footage, audio from the cabin, testimony from passengers who heard every word Gerald said, testimony from the young flight attendant Gerald shoved, a 24-year-old named Tyler Brennan who still had a bruise on his collarbone 3 weeks later. Gerald's defense attorney tried the only angle available. Gerald never explicitly said the word, never used a slur, never made a direct racial statement. Therefore, the defense argued, this was a customer service dispute, not a civil rights issue. The prosecution dismantled that argument in 12 minutes. They presented pattern evidence. 3 prior complaints filed against Gerald at Braxton Development Group properties, 2 from black tenants who reported harassment, intimidation, and lease violations that mysteriously appeared after they filed noise complaints. A former employee testified that Gerald routinely referred to black visitors in his buildings as Section 8 people, regardless of their income. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty, on both counts. Assault on a flight crew member, interference with flight crew operations. The judge's sentence landed like a hammer. 18 months in federal prison, a lifetime ban from all commercial airlines in the United States, $200,000 in fines, a formal no-contact order with Owen Mitchell and all Sky Nation employees involved. Gerald stood motionless as the sentence was read. His attorney placed a hand on his shoulder. Gerald shrugged it off. Outside the courthouse, the consequences kept stacking. Braxton Development Group lost every major contract within 60 days. 3 commercial tenants broke their leases. The Midtown Atlanta condo project was canceled permanently. Gerald's wife, Catherine, filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences, and retained one of Atlanta's most aggressive family law firms. His country club in Buckhead revoked his membership with a 1-paragraph letter. No explanation needed. The empire Gerald Braxton had spent 30 years building came apart in less than 90 days. Sky Nation Airways didn't escape either. The DOT investigation concluded with a finding of systemic discriminatory practices. The fine, $4.2 million, one of the largest civil penalties ever issued against a domestic airline for passenger discrimination. Diane Caldwell was permanently terminated. In a televised interview weeks later, she sat in her living room, eyes swollen, voice cracking, and admitted what the footage had already proven. I made an assumption, she said. I looked at him and I made an assumption. And I was wrong. Craig Lawson was terminated for falsifying his incident report. No interview, no statement. He disappeared from public view entirely. Brenda Holloway resigned before she could be fired. Her resignation letter was 1 sentence long. CEO Philip Tanner held a nationally televised press conference. He stood behind a podium with the Sky Nation logo, that blue and silver eagle, and delivered a full, unqualified apology. No corporate hedging, no mistakes were made language. He named what happened. He called it discrimination. And he announced a $50 million diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative, independently overseen by a board that Owen Mitchell personally insisted upon as a condition of maintaining Pinnacle's investment. Haley Preston's video reached 80 million views. She was featured on every major network. Time magazine put her photo on its digital cover. She used the platform to launch a nonprofit called Clear Skies, dedicated to documenting and fighting discrimination in public transportation. Within 6 months, the organization had chapters in 12 cities. Justice doesn't always come this clean, but this time, it did. 6 months later, Owen Mitchell walked through Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. Same terminal, same concourse, same coffee kiosk where he'd bought a black coffee on a Saturday afternoon that changed everything. He ordered the same coffee. The barista was different, a young man with locks and a wide smile. Owen thanked him by name. Read it off the tag. Some things don't change. He pulled his carry-on through the terminal. No bodyguard, no assistant, just a man in a navy suit moving through the crowd like anyone else. But things were different now. Small things, quiet things. There was a new sign at every Sky Nation gate, a plaque mounted at eye level in clean white letters on blue. Sky Nation Airways is committed to the equal dignity of every passenger. Discrimination of any kind will not be tolerated. Below each plaque, a camera. Body-worn units clipped to every gate agent's lanyard, blinking green, recording, always watching. Owen noticed. He didn't smile, but something behind his eyes softened. He approached gate B14, the same gate. A gate agent, a black woman in her 30s, scanned his boarding pass. She looked at the screen, looked at him. Something crossed her face. Not starstruck, warmer than that. Recognition, respect. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Mitchell." Simply, sincerely, like the most natural thing in the world. Owen nodded. "Thank you." He walked down the jet bridge. The same jet bridge where he'd stood alone 6 months ago, straightening his tie, dialing a number that shut down an entire airline. The fluorescent lights still buzzed. The carpet was still worn. But the air felt lighter somehow. He boarded, turned left into first class, walked to row 3, seat 3A, his seat. He sat down. The leather creaked softly. Late afternoon sunlight slanted through the oval window, warm on his sleeve. Same light, same seat, different world. Seat 3B was occupied. A young black woman, mid-20s, sharp blazer, natural hair pulled back in a confident puff. She was typing on a laptop, a spreadsheet glowing on her screen. She glanced up, gave Owen a polite nod, and went right back to work. Nobody questioned her ticket. Nobody asked her to move. Nobody looked at her sideways. Nobody whispered. She was just a passenger, in her seat, doing her work. Exactly where she belonged. Owen leaned back, took a slow breath, and for the first time in this entire story, he smiled. Not a big smile, not a triumphant one, just a quiet expression that settled across his face the way sunlight finds a window it hasn't reached in a long time. This, right here, this is what normal is supposed to look like. The ripple effects of that Saturday reached far beyond one airline. 3 major U.S. carriers adopted anti-discrimination protocols modeled on Sky Nation's reforms. The industry called it the Mitchell Standard, an informal benchmark for bias accountability in commercial aviation. Not a law, a line in the sand that said, "Not anymore." The Department of Transportation established a national passenger discrimination hotline, the first in American aviation history. First year, over 4,000 reports. 4,000 stories that would have vanished in silence before Owen Mitchell made one phone call. Owen funded full-ride scholarships for aviation professionals from underrepresented communities. 12 students in the first class, 43 by year 2. Pilots, engineers, air traffic controllers, young faces filling cockpits and control towers that had looked the same for far too long. Haley Preston's nonprofit, Clear Skies, grew to 22 chapters nationwide. She never stopped recording, never stopped asking one question: is this right? So here's my question for you. If you were on that plane, first class, watching them drag Owen out of 3A to hand his seat to a man without a first-class ticket, would you have said something? Would you have stood up? Would you have hit record? Or would you have looked away? Be honest. Drop your answer in the comments. And if this story made you feel something, anger, sadness, hope, all three at once, share it. Send it to someone. Post it. Because right now, somewhere in this country, someone is sitting in their own seat 3A being told they don't belong. They need to hear this story today. Like, subscribe, hit the bell. Every share puts this story in front of someone who needs to see it.